President Volodymyr Zelensky continues his ongoing shake-up of Ukraine's military, sacking the army commander-in-chief Oleksandr Syrskyi. He'd only just removed Defence Minister Mykhailo Drapatyi, a move that sparked protests right across Ukraine. 60-year-old Syrskyi was seen by many as old school and Soviet style. He was criticised for resisting the modernization of Ukraine's forces, even as Ukraine continues to develop its high-tech drone warfare. Syrskyi is replaced by 43-year-old Mykhailo Drapatyi, a popular and experienced battlefield commander. President Zelensky thanked the outgoing commander-in-chief, downplaying the role internal differences played in his removal.
Oleksandr Syrskyi delivered results for Ukraine in the defense of Kyiv, the Kharkiv offensive and the Kursk operation. We have come a long way. Ukraine's defense continues and every warrior must be treated with dignity. I'm grateful to Oleksandr Syrskyi and to every one of our warriors for Ukraine's strong positions on the front.
To explain the complexities of this story and how it's all connected, over to Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Would you put all this reshuffling at the top of the military down to internal rivalry?
I mean, certainly that was the explanation we got from President Zelensky when he announced this firing of Fedorov last week. And he basically said that they don't speak to each other unless I'm at the table. I have to bring them together. In other words, they're ignoring each other. And certainly there had been briefings before that had suggested that definitely Fedorov wants to get rid of Syrskyi and the other way around. But as this goes on, the narrative has changed a bit here in Kyiv. There is a lot more talk about worries on the part of Zelensky's team that Fedorov was becoming too popular, too independent, that he was someone who was very well respected in the West among Ukraine's friends and that was getting a lot of recognition internationally for his work, for instance, switching off Starlink for Russian military uses here in Ukraine. That was something he basically negotiated with Elon Musk direct, and I think that was something that people think maybe spooked the Zelensky team, that he was becoming basically a political rival and would want to get rid of him.
Are there concerns in Ukraine that Zelensky has bowed to public pressure over Syrskyi?
I think the overwhelming feeling is relief that this has now happened and that everyone can move on, because the protesters were not going to leave it at that. I think there was a real sense that Syrskyi was the wrong direction. At least that's something you hear from volunteers, from pundits, from lots of people in the military who've risked kind of considerable pushback from their superiors and come out publicly in favour of Fedorov and against Syrskyi. And the main point you hear from them is that basically Syrskyi was trying to fight Russia the way that Russia fights Ukraine, and that basically as a kind of small Soviet-style army, Ukraine was not going to be able to beat Russia as a bigger Soviet-style army, and that only innovation was going to actually give Ukraine any chance of success. In terms of bringing Fedorov back, I think that's a lot more difficult. I think getting rid of Syrskyi was comparatively easier, but it seems like Fedorov is demanding his old job back, or instead of anything else, he's not willing to become an advisor. So we don't know where this kind of Fedorov political crisis is going to go and what his future holds.
Yeah, we're being told he's meant to be or have been offered some sort of prominent role. But as far as old Soviet-style fighting goes, is modernising the military leadership a real must, considering things like corruption, say?
Well, certainly there is a real worry here in Ukraine about corruption. A country at war obviously is going to put most of its money into defence, and that is the case here in Ukraine, where the defence budget is by far the biggest part of the kind of government spending pie. And when you speak to people here, lots of them are convinced that Fedorov also got so much pushback from the system, not just from Syrskyi, but the wider kind of status quo, because he was auditing basically how all that money was spent and, in some cases withdrawing funding for things he didn't think worked or could be achieved more cheaply from other suppliers. So there's a real worry that that was part of the story why Fedorov was pushed out. And I think there is, a broader sense, right, that, one thing that Syrskyi brought in were these kind of units that were doing frontline kind of direct attacks, the kind of so-called storm attacks, storm brigades, and that's something obviously that is very risky to human life, and that this was basically just kind of antiquated form of fighting, that he was copying what the Russians do rather than fighting with robots, fighting with drones. And there is a real hope that the new people in charge are going to come up with ways of holding the front lines with significantly lower human losses.
Well, the new commander-in-chief takes charge at a crucial point in the war and says he wants to step up the counteroffensive. What do you think?
He's definitely someone who comes with a storied military career behind him, right? He's not very old, he's only in his early 40s, but he was already prominent as far back as 2014, when there was kind of very famous footage here in Ukraine of him as the commander of an armoured vehicle, basically pushing through barricades that pro-Russian separatists had put up in Mariupol as part of an operation that managed to hold on to Mariupol back then, where a time where Donetsk and other cities fell to those Russian proxies. Whether or not, what he's able to achieve now in a hurry, what resources he has, we all don't know. But certainly the people out in the square who are protesting in favour of Fedorov, for the most part, are all very satisfied by this. This is a person they think they can get behind. And they're now hoping that basically things we saw happening under Fedorov will continue, including those long-range strikes on Russia, because this was, after all, a kind of moment where it really seemed like things were changing in Ukraine's favour. And that's why so many people were kind of overwhelmed and kind of flabbergasted by this sacking, because it really seemed like Fedorov was actually doing a job that was changing things to Ukraine's favour.
And as Drapatyi steps up to the position, what are going to be the biggest challenges for him?
I think mobilization is the main challenge, right? There is a huge need for more people in the military to also give people who've been fighting for years a chance to move away from the front lines, if not be fully demobilized. And that is obviously very, very politically sensitive. We have all those images on social media here of people being pulled off the streets, sometimes with violence, sometimes people on the streets then resisting those mobilization units and not letting people being taken away. So that is politically a hugely kind of difficult situation to deal with, and that's something that could definitely affect his popularity if he is associated with moves to recruit more people to the military that don't go down well with society.
Connolly, good to see you. And Mykola Bielieskov is from the Ukrainian National Institute for Strategic Studies, part of the Office of the Ukrainian President. He's also an analyst at Ukrainian NGO Come Back Alive. What are Commander-in-Chief Drapatyi's chances of successfully stepping up the counteroffensive?
I think we need to start from a more modest goal. Right now, the goal and the aim for Ukraine is to arrest Russian advances. Yes, the tempo of Russian advances is slower than a year ago, 2 years ago, but still we haven't managed fully to stabilize the front line, to impose maximum damage. And only then, when we stabilize the front line, when we address our shortcomings, our problem like personnel, command and control, training, plus receive a lot of external support out of our partners, we can dream of major counteroffensive. Right now, our goal is more modest.
Mm-hmm. And is this the right guy for the job then?
This is career officer. He rose naturally from battalion level commander. He was 12 years ago when Russia attacked Ukraine and did a land grab in Crimea and did a fight in Donbass. And then he was brigade level commander. He studied at National Defense University in Kyiv. He learned operational art and strategy. He commanded a number of grouping of forces and credited with arresting Russian advances around Kharkiv in May 2024, and also stabilizing situation around Pokrovsk and Myrnograd at the end of 2024, beginning 2025. So he's a kind of officer who right now can assume this position and perform the functions of commander-in-chief, which is strategic management of defense forces in such a big war.
Okay, you're talking about just stabilizing the front lines. Zelensky, I read, wants this new army chief and his commanders to update Ukraine's defense strategy. How does that fit in with what you're saying? Because they're talking about continued reform of the core system. They're also talking about faster weapons and drone deliveries and stronger air defenses as well.
You mentioned Ukrainian challenges we need to address, which is mobilization, which is command and control, which is about core system. Mm-hmm. And actually, if we manage to improve all the stuff, plus sustainably provide Ukraine defense forces with more and more effective UAVs and other means, we can deny Russia victory. We can ensure the situation when Russia is ready to stop this war without any major preconditions, any major concessions out of Ukraine. And this goal is actually a Ukrainian goal for some time, and it aligns with what we have right now and what we can realistically expect. So there is no conflict with what I've said and what is our strategic end goal.
Russia says the changes in Kyiv won't make a difference on the front line. What do you say to that?
What we see is a plateau of Russian military strategy as we know it. We've seen that Russian advances slowed down. They haven't fully stopped, but the price for Russian advances, which slowed down, is increased. So actually, now we expect some Russian moves, like whether they would mobilize or not. But even with mobilization, it won't solve all of their problems, because right now battlefield is shaped by different kinds of robotic platforms. And before they learn how to counter next iteration of Ukrainian robotic platforms, even another round of mobilization won't deliver them ability to dictate the terms of the settlement. So don't expect major changes in either side in short order of time. And overall, situation improved for Ukraine in the last 3-4 months. And we need to ensure that this tendency will be sustained out of Ukrainian side.
Okay, so no major changes, but you don't think Drapatyi is being given an impossible task?
In certain sense, it's one of the most unenviable positions right now, because war fighting, it's more broad than the mandate of commander-in-chief, because we need to address problems we already discussed, and that requires whole of the government effort, whole of the society effort. For us, we depend on our partners, on Europe, on US. But situation in certain sense is a little bit better than when Syrskyi assumed power, because when it happened in 2024, Ukraine was less self-sufficient in terms of battlefield weaponry, in terms of strategic strikes. So in this case, Drapatyi tenure start in a little bit different position, better starting point, but he can't overnight deliver miracle, and it would require consistent government state policy to generate even better momentum than we have right now.
You heard it from Mykola, Bielieskov. Thank you very much for chiming in here on DW.